Last year, when all of this happened, I was 22 years old and completely burned out. Work had drained whatever energy I had left, and life felt strangely distant, like I was watching my own days play out from somewhere outside my body. I won't get into my past. Let's just say my life hadn't exactly been quiet. By that point, I was trying to move away from certain chapters of it and create distance between who I used to be and who I wanted to become. What I needed was a break. Not a vacation full of plans and people, but the kind where you disappear for a few days and nobody knows where you are. I mentioned it one afternoon at work while talking with a coworker in the break room. After listening for a while, he casually suggested a small island off the coast of Maine. The way he described it made it sound almost aggressively boring. There was no nightlife, hardly any tourists after sunset. Most visitors took the ferry over in the morning, walked around for a few hours, and left before evening. According to him, if you stayed overnight, the island became eerily quiet, almost like the whole place belonged to you. That sounded perfect. Later that night, I searched online and found a small vacation rental, a standalone cottage near the shoreline. The price was surprisingly cheap, and it was available exactly when I wanted. Looking back, that should have raised red flags, but I booked it immediately. A couple of days later, I boarded the late afternoon ferry heading toward the island. The ride was peaceful. The water was calm and the air smelled like salt and seaweed. A few tourists stood along the railing taking pictures as the coastline slowly faded behind us. When the island appeared in the distance, it looked smaller than I expected. Just a strip of land with trees and a few scattered buildings near the dock. The ferry pulled into the harbor and passengers filtered onto the wooden pier. Some people headed to a small cafe near the landing, while others followed the narrow shoreline road. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the cottage. It took about 15 minutes. The place looked like the photos online, though smaller in person. One main room with a bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom barely bigger than a closet. Thick brush surrounded the cottage on 3 sides. The front faced the ocean with a single window covered by a thin curtain. The walls felt thin enough that I could hear the wind moving through the brush outside. One thing stood out immediately. The front door had a deadbolt and chain lock that looked brand new. That seemed strange for such an isolated rental, but I ignored it. I dropped my bag and spent the evening walking around the island. It was surreal watching the place slowly empty as day tourists returned to the ferry. By sunset, almost everyone was gone. No streetlights turned on. No traffic. Just waves hitting the rocks and wind through the trees. Exactly the quiet I wanted. Later, I stopped at a small pub near the ferry dock for dinner. There were only a few people inside, mostly locals. The bartender was friendly and asked where I was staying. When I mentioned the cottage, she paused briefly and gave me a strange look before quickly changing the subject. At the time, I didn't think much about it. Around 10:30 p.m., I walked back to the cottage. On the way, I passed a small dock hidden in a rocky cove about 100 yards away. A single boat was tied there. A small blue motorboat. It stood out because every other boat I had seen on the island was a larger lobster vessel. This one looked newer and much smaller. I looked at it for a moment, shrugged, and continued walking. Back at the cottage, I locked the door carefully, deadbolt and chain, then placed my phone on the small table beside the bed. That's when I noticed the problem. My phone wasn't charging. I tried different outlets, unplugged the charger, plugged it back in. Nothing worked. Within minutes, I realized the outlets in the cottage simply didn't work. My phone battery was already low and dropping fast. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed. I had barely slept the past few nights, and exhaustion hit me instantly. I fell asleep almost immediately. At some point during the night, something woke me up. Maybe a sound, maybe instinct. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness of the cottage. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were outside on the gravel. Slow, deliberate, not like an animal. Animals move quickly. These were human footsteps. I stayed perfectly still. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Then they started again. This time, they were closer. They approached the front door and stopped directly outside. My heart was pounding. Suddenly, a beam of light appeared through the thin curtain. A flashlight. Someone outside was shining it inside the cottage. After a moment, the light clicked off. Then the door handle moved. Slowly. The deadbolt held. The handle rattled again. Harder this time. Then the banging started. Loud, violent impacts shook the tiny cottage. That was when my brain snapped out of its frozen state. Someone was trying to break in. I jumped out of bed and crouched beside the door, not really knowing what I planned to do. Suddenly, the banging stopped. Silence returned. Seconds passed. Then a voice spoke from outside. Calm. Male. I know you're in there, Leo. My entire body went cold. The man outside knew my name. I had never heard his voice before. Footsteps moved away from the door. I listened as he slowly walked around the cottage, past the bathroom wall, around the back. He was circling the building. Over the next stretch of time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. I heard him walking around again and again. Sometimes the footsteps disappeared for a minute before returning. Once he moved through the brush behind the cottage. Another time he stopped near the window. The entire time I stayed crouched by the door, too terrified to move. Hearing my name had destroyed whatever confidence I had left. My mind kept racing. Who was this? How did he know me? Why was he here? Eventually, the footsteps moved away toward the cove. Then I heard something else. An engine. A small outboard motor starting. The sound drifted across the water and slowly faded into the distance. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Not even a minute. As soon as the sky began to lighten, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The gravel around the cottage told the whole story. Boot prints. Heavy ones. They circled the cottage multiple times. And they formed a clear trail leading straight toward the dock in the cove. The same dock where I had seen the blue motorboat earlier that evening.